The rumbling crescendo of heavy strategic bombers piercing the Middle Eastern sky wasn't just a flight demonstration. It was a kinetic pronouncement, a strategic imperative delivered not through diplomatic cables, but through the unmistakable language of raw military power. This recent deployment, showcasing America's long-range strike capability, was explicitly designed to send an unequivocal message across the region, particularly to Tehran, signaling a continued commitment to regional security and, ostensibly, a forceful rejection of destabilizing actions. But was this a genuine reassertion of deterrence, or merely a performative spectacle designed to mask deeper structural vulnerabilities within America's global defense posture? A posture increasingly challenged by an administrative defense bureaucracy more concerned with ideological crusades than kinetic lethality? The central question we must confront is whether these highly visible displays of power truly enhance the warfighter's readiness and strategic deterrence, or if they have become symbolic gestures, manipulated by a bloated military-industrial complex to justify exorbitant budgets while simultaneously compromising the very lethality and focus required for great power competition. We must ask whether the Pentagon bureaucracy, often detached from the harsh realities of the E-ring, prioritizes ideological policy over the unyielding demands of strategic deterrence, ultimately leaving our nation more vulnerable despite the outward appearance of strength. Let's unpack the observable event, the strategic bomber deployment. When the United States Air Force vectors its heavy bombers, platforms like the B-52 Stratofortress, the B-1B Lancer, or on rare occasions, the stealthy B-2 Spirit, into a theater, it's never a casual exercise. These aircraft are the apex predators of global air power, each representing decades of engineering, immense destructive potential, and the logistical might of a global superpower. A B-52, for instance, a venerable workhorse design during the Eisenhower administration, has been continuously modernized, integrating advanced avionics, communication suites, and precision-guided munitions capabilities that its original designers could scarcely have imagined. It can carry up to 70,000 pounds of mixed ordnance, including conventional bombs, mines, missiles, and standoff weapons, with an unrefueled combat range exceeding 8,800 miles. When such an asset, or a formation of them, transits through airspace proximate to a nation like Iran, it's not simply a patrol. It's a deliberate act of coercive diplomacy, a visual and auditory declaration of intent. The reverberations from their engines are felt not just in the air, but in the command bunkers and intelligence centers of every actor in the region. However, the efficacy of such bomber diplomacy, or presence operations, is far from universally accepted within the E-ring. While proponents argue that it reinforces the concept of reach back, the ability to project power from distant bases, circumventing the need for forward-deployed ground forces, skeptics raise critical questions about its actual deterrent effect. Is the mere presence of an aircraft, however formidable, truly enough to dissuade a determined adversary like the Islamic Republic, which has spent decades perfecting asymmetric warfare tactics and cultivating a vast network of proxies designed to operate below the threshold of conventional conflict? Or does it merely confirm to them the predictable patterns of American signaling, allowing them to adapt their own strategies accordingly? This leads directly into the motivations emanating from the opaque corridors of the Pentagon and the self-perpetuating mechanisms of the defense industry. Every strategic deployment, every operational exercise, whether explicitly stated or not, serves multiple purposes. On one level, it's about validating military doctrine and demonstrating capability to allies and adversaries. On another, more cynical level, these operations are potent political tools and powerful arguments in the perpetual battle for defense appropriations. When a B-52, a platform often deemed too old by certain factions, successfully executes a long-range mission, it provides undeniable proof of its enduring relevance, strengthening the argument for its continued modernization and the budgets associated with those upgrades. Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. These industrial behemoths and their subcontractors stand to gain immensely from the sustained operational tempo and continuous enhancement of existing platforms, not to mention the development of next-generation systems. The underlying bureaucratic motivation often prioritizes the survival of programs and the expansion of budgets over unvarnished strategic efficacy. A visible bomber deployment can be presented to Congress as concrete evidence of global reach and force projection, justifying the allocation of billions to strategic command and air mobility assets. It becomes a performative act, often decoupled from the true state of readiness, supply chain vulnerabilities, or the debilitating administrative bloat that siphons resources away from direct warfighter support. The question isn't just about what message is being sent to Iran, but what message is being broadcast internally within the Beltway to ensure the continued flow of taxpayer dollars into the defense industrial base. The unelected officials and entrenched bureaucrats within the defense establishment have mastered the art of leveraging perceived threats and operational needs to maintain their power and influence, often at the expense of strategic clarity and kinetic reality. Delving deeper into strategic doctrine and force posture realities, this bomber overflight must be understood within a larger framework of integrated deterrence. This concept, often articulated in official pronouncements, aims to seamlessly blend conventional military might with economic leverage, diplomatic pressure, and cyber capabilities. However, the practical application often falls short of the theoretical ideal. In the Middle East, a region characterized by complex proxy networks, hybrid warfare, and a deep distrust of external powers, the blunt instrument of a strategic bomber may not be the most effective tool for deterrence, especially against an adversary primarily focused on asymmetric responses. U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, has long grappled with the challenge of maintaining stability in a volatile region while simultaneously managing the inherent limitations of force posture. Forward deployed assets, while critical, are vulnerable. Deploying strategic bombers from continental United States, CONUS, bases, or from distant Allied airfields showcases an impressive logistical capability, but also highlights the increasing strain on an aging fleet, a dwindling number of combat-ready aircraft, and the critical need for tanker support. Each leg of such a mission requires meticulous planning, extensive aerial refueling, and robust command and control infrastructure. The fact that such operations are becoming more frequent hints at a strategic quandary, a desire to project strength without committing to a permanent, potentially provocative, ground presence. Yet, this strategy also carries significant opportunity costs. Every hour AB-52 is airborne in the Middle East is an hour it's not being utilized for training, readiness exercises, or potential deployment in the Indo-Pacific theater, where the genuine long-term strategic competition with China is unfolding. The pivot to Asia remains a critical, albeit often underserved, tenet of American grand strategy. Diverting high-value assets to what some within the earring view as a secondary theater of operations, even for a show of force, speaks volumes about the persistent pull of legacy commitments and the difficulty of truly reorienting America's global military posture. It suggests a strategic tension between maintaining the status quo in one region and preparing for a potentially existential conflict in another. The global consequences and adversary reactions to such a deployment are multifaceted. For Iran, the message is likely received with a mixture of calculated defiance and strategic adaptation. While the visual spectacle of American air power cannot be ignored, Tehran's military strategists are keenly aware of the limitations of conventional deterrence against their asymmetric capabilities. They operate with a deeply ingrained understanding that direct conventional conflict with the United States is unwinnable, but they have perfected the art of gray zone warfare, using proxies, cyber attacks, and missile proliferation to achieve their objectives below the threshold of a full-scale kinetic response. A bomber overflight, while a clear signal, may reinforce their belief that America is unwilling to engage in a costly ground war, and therefore, their asymmetric pathways to influence remain viable. Regional allies, particularly the Gulf Cooperation Council states, likely view this as a welcome, albeit temporary, reassurance. For them, American air power remains the ultimate security guarantor against an expansionist Iran. However, even among allies, there's a quiet skepticism about the sustained commitment of American power, especially given past shifts in U.S. foreign policy and the perceived withdrawal from the region. Such operations may temporarily assuage fears, but they do little to address the fundamental question of long-term strategic alignment and the reliability of American security pledges. More importantly, near-peer adversaries like Russia and China closely monitor these deployments. For Beijing, every U.S. military action in the Middle East is analyzed through the lens of its implications for the Indo-Pacific. They assess American logistical capabilities, command and control resilience, and a willingness to commit high-end assets to disparate theaters. If they perceive these deployments as stretching U.S. resources thin or as a distraction from the primary strategic challenge they pose, it could embolden their own gray zone aggressions in areas like the South China Sea or against Taiwan. Moscow, similarly, uses these actions to gauge the coherence and resolve of American foreign policy, seeking out cracks in the alliance structure and opportunities to expand its own influence in the Middle East. For them, a show of force in the region could be interpreted as America's continued entanglement, a strategic drain that diverts attention and resources away from other crucial geopolitical battlegrounds. Behind the polished public relations of the Pentagon, the earring reality is often far more complex and fraught with internal contradictions. The senior military leadership, particularly within the combatant commands, understands the critical importance of readiness and the erosion caused by years of underinvestment in maintenance, spare parts, and adequate training. There's a constant tension between the desire to project strength globally and the hard reality of finite resources, declining personnel numbers in critical fields, and an aging force structure. While the generals and admirals publicly affirm these deployments as necessary deterrents, privately, many express concerns about the administrative rot that has seeped into the defense apparatus. The politicization of the officer corps, the emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion mandates over war-fighting proficiency, and the proliferation of non-kinetic social programs within the military all contribute to a degradation of core combat capabilities. Resources that should be dedicated to readiness, pilot training hours, and maintaining advanced weapon systems are often siphoned off to pursue ideological agendas championed by unelected defense bureaucrats. This creates a dangerous dichotomy. Outward displays of formidable hardware, like strategic bombers, juxtaposed against an internal reality of stretched resources, maintenance backlogs, and a potential decline in the cutting edge of warfighter readiness. An insider might reveal that for every bomber mission flown, there are countless hours spent grappling with procurement delays, bureaucratic obstacles, and the sheer inertia of a system resistant to change, all of which directly impact the ability to project power effectively and sustainably. Consider the history of strategic deterrence through air power. During the Cold War, the Strategic Air Command, SSE, maintained a constant airborne alert, with B-52s carrying nuclear payloads circling the globe. This was an undeniable form of deterrence, a constant, visible threat of massive retaliation that arguably prevented direct conflict with the Soviet Union. However, that era was defined by a bipolar world and a clear, existential threat. The current geopolitical landscape is far more fragmented, characterized by non-state actors, hybrid threats, and near-peer competitors who leverage cyber warfare and information operations as much as, if not more than, conventional arms. The lessons of that era, while foundational, cannot be blindly applied to the complexities of today without rigorous adaptation. The acquisition mechanisms within the Department of Defense also play a critical, often insidious, role in shaping these operational realities. The process for developing and procuring advanced weaponry is notoriously slow, expensive, and susceptible to lobbying by defense contractors. For example, the development of the B-21 Raider, America's next-generation strategic bomber, is critical for future deterrence, yet its progress is constantly under scrutiny, not just for its technological advancements, but for its colossal price tag and the inevitable delays that seem baked into the defense acquisition cycle. Current bomber deployments, while demonstrating existing capabilities, also serve as a powerful justification for these future programs, ensuring that the revenue streams for the major players in the military-industrial complex remain robust. The cycle is self-reinforcing. Perceived threats lead to deployments, deployments justify budgets, budgets fund programs, and those programs, in turn, sustain the very industrial base that champions the deployments. It's a complex ecosystem where genuine strategic needs can become intertwined with powerful financial incentives. This dynamic often leads to a phenomenon where the Pentagon and the defense industry become mutually dependent, prioritizing contracts and program continuation over hard-nosed strategic assessments. Critical evaluations of weapon system effectiveness, cost-benefit analyses, and the actual utility of certain platforms in diverse operational environments can be diluted or outright ignored when powerful political and financial interests are at stake. The result is an acquisition system that often delivers platforms late, over budget, and sometimes not perfectly suited for the evolving nature of warfare. This, in turn, directly impacts the ability of the United States to maintain its edge against rapidly modernizing adversaries who are not burdened by the same bureaucratic inertia or special interest demands. The long-term implications for U.S. global supremacy are profound. While the spectacle of American air power can momentarily stabilize a region or send a sharp message, it does not fundamentally alter the trajectory of global power shifts. The unipolar moment where the United States enjoyed unchallenged military and economic dominance is rapidly receding. We are moving into a multipolar world where the strategic calculus is far more complex, and where adversaries like China are investing heavily in anti-access/area denial, A2/AD, capabilities designed specifically to counter U.S. power projection platforms, including long-range bombers. They are building robust missile defenses, advanced air forces, and cyber warfare units with the explicit goal of nullifying America's traditional advantages. Therefore, an isolated bomber deployment in the Middle East, while tactically relevant in the immediate context, must be viewed through the wider lens of grand strategy. Does it consume resources that could be better spent on accelerating the development of hypersonic weapons, next-generation stealth platforms, or advanced cyber offensive capabilities that are crucial for maintaining an edge against near-peer threats? Does it distract from the urgent need to reform the defense bureaucracy, streamline acquisition, and refocus the military on its core mission of lethal warfighting? Or does it simply reinforce a cycle of reactive foreign policy, chasing every brushfire while the structural integrity of the American strategic position slowly erodes? The challenge for the United States is not simply to project power, but to project relevant power in a rapidly evolving geopolitical landscape. This means moving beyond performative displays and engaging in genuine, first principles analysis of what truly constitutes deterrence in the 21st century. It requires a rigorous, unapologetic assessment of where our resources are being spent, how effectively they are being utilized, and whether the institutional incentives within the Pentagon align with the actual strategic imperatives of national security. It demands a hard look at the weaponization of the Pentagon bureaucracy, where policy priorities often supersede kinetic realities, and where the administrative state can become a greater impediment to national security than any external adversary. The very concept of American sovereignty and military superiority is under constant assault, not just from external actors, but from internal forces that prioritize ideological purity over strategic pragmatism. The erosion of strategic deterrence is a direct consequence of this shift. where a focus on non-lethal mandates and politically correct initiatives dilutes the focus on war-fighting excellence. The U.S. military, the most powerful fighting force in history, risks becoming a hollowed-out shell if its leadership continues to prioritize administrative bloat and social engineering over the relentless pursuit of combat readiness and strategic advantage. The recent bomber deployment, then, is a symptom, not a cure. It's a visual reminder of what America can do, but it obscures the deeper questions of what America is doing to truly secure its future in a dangerous world. Ultimately, this single act of force projection, reverberating across the Middle East, exposes the precarious balance between maintaining regional stability and allocating scarce resources for the existential challenges of great power competition. It reveals the persistent, often self-serving mechanisms of the defense industrial complex and the bureaucratic inertia within the Pentagon that can dilute strategic clarity. It compels us to confront the uncomfortable truth that while the machines of war are impressive, the strategic mind driving them and the institutional integrity supporting them are facing unprecedented pressures. This raises a fundamental, enduring question for every patriotic American. In a world where global adversaries are rapidly modernizing and ideological agendas are increasingly prioritized over kinetic lethality within our own defense establishment, how long can America continue to project its power without first restoring the foundational principles of warfighting excellence and uncompromising strategic realism at home?